In the quiet, picturesque village of Vierville-sur-Mer, nestled along the Norman coast, whispers of an impending invasion stirred the air, bringing with them a tide of fear and anticipation. As the villagers went about their lives, beneath the surface lay a deep current of anxiety, a premonition of the impending storm that would soon break over their homes and hearts. Among them was Émilie Girard, a young schoolteacher whose strength and resolve would soon be tested in ways she never imagined. As dawn broke on June 6, 1944, the horizon bristled with the might of an Allied armada, and the skies roared with the engines of war. This was the day the world turned its eyes to Normandy, the day when the fate of nations hung in the balance, and the day when Émilie and her fellow villagers would find themselves at the epicenter of one of history's most monumental battles. As the first boats touched the sand and the first shots rang out, their lives would change forever, weaving them into the tapestry of a world at war. In the small village of Vierville-sur-Mer, along the coast of Normandy, life moved as softly as the waves on the shore. Émilie Girard, a young woman with chestnut hair neatly tied up, walked the cobblestone streets, her steps echoing a sense of normalcy that everyone tried to maintain. She passed the bakery, where the smell of fresh bread filled the air, a small comfort in these hard times. Émilie was the village schoolteacher, loved for her kindness and smart mind. Every day she tried to teach her students not just reading and math, but also hope and bravery, which were much needed during these difficult times. The villagers respected her, often seeking her advice on matters big and small. As she walked, the chatter of the villagers filled the air, but today it was different. There was a sense of unease, a buzz of rumors about an impending Allied invasion. These whispers had been there for weeks, growing louder with each passing day. The Germans had occupied their village for years now, and the thought of liberation was both thrilling and terrifying. Émilie stopped by the old fountain in the village square, where a group of her friends gathered talking in hushed tones. "They say the Americans and British are coming, with thousands of ships and men," whispered one woman, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "But when? And where?" asked another, looking around as if the Germans might overhear them. Émilie joined in. "We must be careful with such talk. But yes, I've heard it too. From the coast one can see more ships than usual. Something big is coming." The conversation shifted as they discussed their daily hardships, rationing, curfews, and the ever-present fear of German soldiers. Yet, beneath the talk of everyday life, the anticipation of the invasion lingered like a faint but unshakable shadow. Later, as Émilie walked home, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village. She looked out towards the sea, imagining the vast armada that might soon appear on the horizon. In her heart she felt a stirring mix of hope and dread. Liberation was a dream they all shared, but at what cost? War was never without its tragedies. As night fell, Émilie sat by her window, a lone candle flickering beside her. She wrote in her diary, a habit she kept to pour out her thoughts and fears. "The whispers of war grow louder each day," she wrote. "Soon our lives might change forever. I can only hope that when the dawn of liberation comes, it brings a brighter future with it." The village slept, unaware of the tides of history that were shifting, drawing ever closer to their doorstep. And in the heart of Vierville-sur-Mer, among the whispering winds and the restless sea, Émilie dreamed of peace for her beloved village. As the dawn broke over Vierville-sur-Mer, a soft golden light spread across the village, painting the old stone houses with a warm glow. Émilie woke early, as was her routine, but today her heart beat with an unusual urgency. The whispers of an impending invasion had grown into a chorus of anxious speculation. Today, more than ever, the air was thick with anticipation. She dressed quickly and made her way to the schoolhouse, a small building with worn wooden desks and a chalkboard that had seen better years. The children, usually lively and chattering, were subdued, sensing the tension that gripped the adults. Emily offered them a smile, though she felt the weight of worry in her own heart. "Good morning, everyone. Let's start with some reading," she announced, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. As the children recited their lessons, her mind wandered to the news she had heard from the local resistance the night before. They spoke of signals and coded messages, of a giant fleet amassing across the channel. It was hard to grasp the enormity of what was coming. After school, Emily decided to visit her father, who lived on the outskirts of the village. As she walked, she noticed more activity than usual, trucks rumbling in the distance and the distant buzz of aircraft. The Germans were on edge, their patrols more frequent and their gazes more suspicious. Her father was tending to his small garden when she arrived, his hands deep in the soil. He looked up, his face lined with the years but his eyes still sharp. "Emily, my dear," he greeted her, wiping his hands on his apron. "I see the worry in your eyes. Come, sit with me." They sat on the old wooden bench, overlooking the fields that stretched towards the sea. Her father had always been her rock, his calm demeanor a counterpoint to her more anxious nature. "Father, they say the invasion is imminent. The children are scared, the villagers are whispering of war and freedom. I don't know what to expect," Emily confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "War is a storm, my child. It frightens us, it shakes the earth, but it also passes. We must stand strong like the old oak in the field, bend with the wind but never break." As they spoke, the distant rumble of engines grew louder. They looked up to see a formation of planes crossing the sky, their shadows fleeting over the fields. It was a stark reminder of the conflict that loomed over them. "Go home, Emily. Be with your mother and brother. Look after each other," her father advised, a serious tone underlining his words. Emily nodded, squeezing his hand before standing. She made her way back to the heart of the village, the setting sun casting long shadows across her path. The streets were quieter now, the villagers retreating to their homes, the laughter of children replaced by hushed conversations and the clatter of shutters being closed. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She sat by her window, the candle long extinguished, staring out into the darkness. The village was a silhouette against the starry sky, a peaceful scene that belied the storm on the horizon. In her heart, she whispered a prayer for her village, for the unknown soldiers who would soon descend upon their shores, and for the dawn of a new day that would bring with it the winds of change. The night passed with a restless tension hanging over Vierville-sur-Mer. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Emily was already awake, her body tense with anticipation. The village was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the usual morning bustle. Even the birds seemed to sense the gravity of the day. Emily made her way to the highest point in the village, a small hill that overlooked the coast. From there, she could see the vast expanse of the English Channel, its waters stretching out towards the unknown. As she watched, the horizon began to bristle with the shapes of ships, more than she could count, converging towards the shore. The invasion, long whispered about and feared, was beginning. The first sounds were distant booms, the kind that you feel in your chest more than hear. They grew louder and more frequent, a thunderous chorus that heralded the arrival of the Allied forces. Then the aircraft came, swarms of them, roaring overhead, their shadows darting across the village and out towards the beaches. In the village, people emerged from their homes, drawn by the noise and the unshakable urge to witness history unfold. They joined Emily on the hill, their faces a mix of fear, awe, and hope. Among them were the old, who had seen war before, and the young, for whom the conflict was a terrifying mystery. As the sun rose higher, the first landing craft could be seen approaching the shore, tiny specks against the vast ocean. They were met with a barrage of fire from the German defenses, puffs of smoke and flame erupting along the coastline. Even from the distance, the violence of the landing was palpable. Emily's heart raced as she watched, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear for the soldiers, for her village, and for what the day would bring. Beside her, a mother clutched her child, her lips moving in silent prayer. An old man stood stoically, his eyes fixed on the scene, a testament to the resilience of those who had already endured so much. The battle raged on, the sounds of conflict echoing against the hills. By mid-morning, the beach was obscured by smoke, a chaotic blur of movement and noise. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, and the sea churned with the passage of ships and boats. Emily could only watch, her mind racing with the implications of each explosion, each plume of smoke. The liberation they had longed for was at their doorstep, but it came with a cost that was all too visible. As the hours passed, the initial intensity of the landing gave way to a steady, grinding conflict. The village was no longer a quiet observer. It became a hub of activity. Wounded soldiers, both Allied and German, were brought in, their uniforms stained and torn. Emily found herself drawn to help, her schoolteacher's calm giving way to a determined focus as she aided the medics and comforted the injured. By evening, the village was transformed. Homes and buildings had become makeshift hospitals, the streets filled with the weary, the wounded, and those trying to help. Through it all, Emily moved with a purpose, her fear pushed aside by the immediate need to act, to do something amidst the chaos. As night fell, the sounds of battle still echoed in the distance, a grim reminder that the fight was far from over. But in the village, there was a sense of grim determination, a collective resolve to endure and to help in whatever way they could. Emily finally allowed herself a moment of rest, sitting beside a wounded soldier who slept fitfully. She looked out towards the darkened sea, where the flashes of distant gunfire flickered like lightning on the horizon. The day had brought shock, fear, and a fierce upheaval, but it had also brought a glimmer of hope, a sense that the long night of occupation might finally be ending. As she watched the distant battle, Emily held on to that hope, a fragile thread in the tumult of war. The day after the landings, Vierville-sur-Mer awoke to a world irrevocably changed. The once tranquil village was now a hive of frenzied activity, caught between the advancing Allied forces and the retreating German troops. The streets where children once played were now a patchwork of debris and makeshift barriers. Emily, with barely a moment's sleep, continued her tireless work. The schoolhouse had been transformed into a triage center, its chalkboard now listing the names of the wounded and the needed supplies. The air was heavy with the scent of medicine and the groans of the injured. Each face that passed through the makeshift wards told a story of the horror unfolding at the beaches and beyond. As she moved among the cots, providing whatever comfort she could, Emily couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the soldiers. Young men, some not much older than her students, their eyes reflecting a haunting mix of fear, pain, and determination. German prisoners, too, were brought in, their proud uniforms now tattered and bloodied, a testament to the futility of war. Outside, the village was no less chaotic. German soldiers, in their haste to retreat, moved through the village in a disorganized scramble, their discipline broken by the relentless Allied advance. They commandeered vehicles, shouted orders in harsh, desperate tones, and cast suspicious glares at the villagers who watched them with a complex mix of emotions. The once distant rumble of artillery was now a constant companion, its thunderous voice a grim soundtrack to the unfolding drama. Overhead, the sky was streaked with the contrails of fighter planes, dancing their deadly ballet in the blue expanse above. In the midst of all this, a group of resistance fighters moved through the village, their faces set with determined resolve. They had waited long for this moment, their operations now shifting from covert sabotage to open support of the Allied efforts. Emily recognized some of them, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and worry for the dangers they faced. As the day wore on, the tide of the battle seemed to turn. News trickled in of beachheads secured, of villages liberated further down the coast. Yet, with each bit of hopeful news came more wounded, more stories of the brutal cost of each advance. By late afternoon, a column of American soldiers marched through the village, their uniforms dusty and worn, their gazes fixed ahead. The villagers, emerging from their homes, watched them pass with a complex mix of relief, awe, and apprehension. Liberation was at their doorstep, but it was clear the path to freedom would be long and fraught with hardship. Emily stood at the doorway of the schoolhouse, watching the soldiers. Among them she locked eyes with a young American, his face smeared with dirt, a bandage wrapped hastily around his arm. For a moment, their gazes held, a silent exchange of humanity amidst the chaos. Then the moment passed, and the column moved on, leaving only the dust of their passage behind. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village, a quiet settled over Vierville-sur-Mer. The frenetic energy of the day gave way to an exhausted calm. The villagers, soldiers, and medics alike took a moment to breathe, to tend to their own wounds and those of their comrades. Emily, finally allowing herself to sit, felt the weight of the day settle over her. She was tired, her body aching from the constant motion, her heart heavy with the sights and sounds of the day. Yet, as she looked around at the faces of her fellow villagers, at the soldiers resting in the cots, she felt a stirring of something else, a sense of purpose, of a shared struggle that bound them all together. The night fell, and with it, a silence that was more than the absence of noise. It was a collective pause, a village holding its breath, gathering strength for the days ahead. And in that silence, Emily found a moment of peace, a sliver of hope in the long shadow of war. The following days blurred into a relentless pace of urgency and survival. Vierville-sur-Mer, once a picturesque village by the sea, now lay in the shadow of a brutal and unyielding conflict. The Allied forces continued their push inland, and the village found itself caught in the middle of a fierce struggle for control. Emily woke to the sound of distant gunfire and artillery. The dawn light brought no peace, only the harsh reality of another day in a war-torn village. She dressed quickly, her movements automatic, driven by a sense of duty that had become her lifeline in the chaos. As she stepped out onto the street, the damage from the previous day's skirmishes was evident. Buildings bore the scars of shrapnel and gunfire, windows shattered, walls pocked and crumbling. The streets were littered with the detritus of war, spent cartridges, broken equipment, and the occasional, heart-wrenching reminder of the human cost. The schoolhouse, now a symbol of the village's resilience, buzzed with activity. Wounded soldiers continued to arrive, some on foot, supported by their comrades. Others carried on makeshift stretchers. Emily and the other volunteers worked tirelessly, their faces set with grim determination, their hands moving with practiced efficiency. But as the front lines shifted, the village's ordeal was far from over. German forces, determined to hold their ground, launched counterattacks, their desperation evident in the ferocity of their assaults. The village, caught between the advancing Allies and the retreating Germans, became a battleground, its streets and homes transformed into strategic positions to be fought over. One afternoon, as Emily was tending to a young British soldier with a shrapnel wound, the sound of approaching vehicles and shouts in German sent a ripple of fear through the makeshift hospital. They were under attack. The patients who could move were quickly hidden away, while others lay still, feigning unconsciousness or worse. Emily's heart pounded as she hid under a table, her body tense and ready to flee or fight. The door burst open, and German soldiers stormed in, their eyes scanning for any sign of resistance fighters or valuable supplies. They shouted orders, their voices harsh and commanding. Emily held her breath, praying they would leave quickly and without further violence. After what felt like an eternity, the soldiers moved on, leaving behind a wake of disrupted lives and frayed nerves. Emily emerged from her hiding place, her relief tempered by the knowledge that the danger was never far away. In the days that followed, the village saw more of the same, fleeting moments of calm shattered by sudden skirmishes, the ebb and flow of battle lines bringing new waves of wounded and weary. Through it all, Emily and the villagers endured, their spirits bolstered by small acts of kindness and the shared bond of those who have seen the worst and still dare to hope for the best. One evening, as the sun set and a temporary lull descended on the village, Emily walked through the streets, her steps taking her to the old fountain in the square. The water was still, the usual gathering of friends and neighbors now scattered by war. She sat on the edge, her reflection staring back at her from the water's surface. The woman who looked back was changed, her eyes older, her face marked by the trials of the past days. But in her gaze, there was also a flicker of something else, a determination, a refusal to be broken by the horrors she had witnessed. As the night closed in, Emily rose and made her way back to the schoolhouse. The next day would bring more challenges, more heartache, and more moments of fear and bravery. But for now, she allowed herself the small comfort of the quiet streets, the gentle whisper of the wind, and the enduring hope that, somehow, they would see this through. In the days following the tumultuous skirmishes and the ever-present danger, there was a subtle shift in the air over Vierville-sur-Mer. The once continuous thunder of war had moved further inland, leaving behind a battered but still standing village. The front lines had advanced, and with them the most immediate threats receded, leaving a tenuous sense of relief in their wake. Emily, who had become a constant presence at the aid station, noticed the change first in the faces of the soldiers and villagers. There was still fear and exhaustion, but also something new, relief, however fragile, and the tentative stirrings of hope. The Allied troops were consolidating their gains, pushing the German forces back mile by hard-fought mile. Perhaps, just perhaps, the end of the occupation was in sight. The schoolhouse had quieted slightly, the flow of wounded now a steady stream rather than the overwhelming flood of the first days. Emily and the other volunteers had settled into a grim routine, their actions automatic, their care for the injured a small beacon of humanity in the midst of war's chaos. One morning, a small unit of American soldiers arrived in the village, not to seek shelter or aid, but to bring news. The village elder, a stoic man who had seen much in his years, met them in the square, the villagers gathering around, drawn by the promise of information. "We've secured the area around Vierville," one of the soldiers announced, his French heavily accented but clear. "The German forces are retreating. It's safe for now, but stay vigilant." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mix of disbelief, relief, and 1,000 unasked questions. Safe, for now. The words hung in the air, a fragile promise in a world that had been turned upside down. In the days that followed, life in Vierville-sur-Mer began to inch towards something resembling normalcy. Farmers returned to their fields, cautious but determined to reclaim their livelihoods. The bakery reopened, the smell of fresh bread a small comfort amid the lingering scars of battle. Children played in the streets, their laughter a defiant sound against the backdrop of recent memories. Emily, too, found a new rhythm, her days still filled with caring for the wounded, but now also with helping to rebuild the village. She joined efforts to repair homes, salvage what could be saved, and provide support to those who had lost nearly everything. The work was hard and the progress slow, but each small victory was a step towards reclaiming their lives. One evening, as she walked back to her home, the setting sun casting a soft glow over the repaired roofs and cleared streets, she saw a group of villagers gathered around the fountain. They were talking and laughing, a simple moment of joy and community that had been so rare in recent times. Emily approached, drawn by the warmth of the scene. As she joined them, they welcomed her with smiles and nods, sharing stories of the day's work and plans for tomorrow. In their voices, she heard the strength and resilience that had carried them through the darkest days, and in their faces, she saw the determination that would lead them into the future. The war was not over, and many challenges lay ahead. But in that moment, around the old fountain, there was a sense of unity and hope. They were still standing, still fighting for every day of peace and normalcy. And as the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Emily realized that this, too, was a form of victory, a testament to the enduring spirit of Vierville-sur-Mer and its people. As she walked home, the voices of her friends and neighbors followed her, a gentle reminder of the community that had survived and would continue to survive, whatever the future held. And in her heart, Emily carried a fragile but growing hope, a sense that even in the darkest times, the light of human courage and resilience could never be completely extinguished. The weeks turned into months, and the once omnipresent rumble of war faded into a distant echo. The Allied forces pushed further into France, liberating towns and cities one by one. Vierville-sur-Mer, with its scars and memories, began the slow process of healing and rebuilding. The war was still a harsh reality, but for the villagers, the immediate terror had receded, leaving space for grief, reflection, and the daunting task of rebuilding their lives. Emily, who had become a pillar of strength in the community, continued her work with unwavering determination. The schoolhouse, once a makeshift hospital, was gradually restored to a place of learning and laughter. She scrubbed the floors herself, erasing the stains of its recent past, determined to return it to a sanctuary for her students. The children, their innocence shadowed by the events they had witnessed, returned hesitantly at first, their smiles slowly returning as the routine of lessons and play re-established itself. The village itself was a hive of activity. Buildings were repaired, roads cleared, and fields tended to with a newfound appreciation for the peace that allowed such mundane tasks. The bakery, its ovens once cold and silent, now filled the morning air with the warm, comforting aroma of fresh bread. People, once cautious and weary, now greeted each other with nods and words of encouragement, their shared experiences a silent bond that held the community together. But the war had left its indelible marks. Some homes remained empty, their occupants never returning from the conflict that had swept them away. Others bore the physical scars of war, limping through their days, a constant reminder of the price of freedom and peace. The village cemetery had grown, its quiet expanse a testament to the cost of the past months. Emily often visited the graves, laying flowers and pausing to reflect on the lives lost and the resilience of those who remained. She felt a deep connection to each stone, each name etched into the village's history. They were a part of her story now, a chapter in the book of her life that would never be forgotten. As summer turned to autumn, and the leaves began to paint the countryside with hues of gold and red, a sense of cautious optimism settled over Vierville-sur-Mer. The harvest was gathered, a bountiful reminder of the village's enduring spirit. Festivals and celebrations, once muted and overshadowed by war, now returned with a vibrancy fueled by the gratitude of survival and the joy of freedom. Emily found herself at the center of these festivities, her spirit and energy a beacon for the community. She organized gatherings, encouraged the sharing of stories and memories, and fostered a sense of hope for the future. The village, her village, was coming back to life, its heartbeat strong and defiant against the trials it had faced. In the quiet moments, when the celebrations ended and the night wrapped the village in a cool embrace, Emily would sit by her window, gazing at the stars that twinkled above. The world was still uncertain, the future unclear, but in her heart she carried the unshakable belief that they would endure, rebuild, and thrive. The war had changed them all, but it had also brought them together, forging bonds of community and strength that would outlast the darkest of times. Vierville-sur-Mer, with its winding streets and weathered homes, its fields of green and shores of gray, was more than just a place. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit, a small village that stood tall against the tides of war. And as Emily closed her eyes, the soft murmur of the sea lulling her to sleep, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, as a village, as a community, as a family forged in the fires of conflict and bonded by the shared dream of a peaceful tomorrow.